And welcome back. So, as promised, I'm going to start this particular video series, and this is going to be installing a remote start unit into a 2021 Jeep Compass. And the module I'm using is an aftermarket module, mainly because I couldn't find a kit put out by Mopar to cover a 2021. But the kit I got from Crutchfield. And if you're unfamiliar with Crutchfield, they sell automotive and other equipment. Audio and other equipment for automotive applications. And they do a really good job if you give them your make, model, and year of vehicle of telling you exactly what will fit in your vehicle and what accessories you need. So when I ordered this particular kit, which you can see here, this is a portion of the PDF installation manual for said remote start. There's two different modules. This one was getting the higher reviews, so I picked this one up. You can see the part number there. So CMC HXA0. It also required a wiring harness, which this is the one Crutchfield said that we needed for our make and model of vehicle that we're dealing with. You can see that says 2011 plus for Chrysler, Dodge, Fiat, Jeep, Maserati, Ram, and SRT. You notice it says it's a THA CH12. And remember that's going to become important later. And of course, this is the adapter that you need in order to flash firmware and updates into this module here. What I wanted to kind of show you first was a little bit of their install dock, and you can see here that this CH12 installation guide here matches our wiring harness. And if we, so hardware CMC HXA0, you can see that CMC HXA0 also matches the actual control module itself. And when I ordered this from Crutchfield, they actually sent me a link to this install guide, as well as a link to this. You'll see an important note here that according to the manufacturer of this unit, you have to go through a little bit of a programming procedure. In other words, you have to upload and flash firmware onto this. Apparently they're sold blank without the software, and you need to load it. But we'll cover all that when we get to it. The first thing I wanted to show is when you get their manual, it's kind of all-encompassing for everything that this particular module here will support as far as make, model, and year. So it may look a little bit daunting to kind of figure out exactly the wiring diagram that you need. But if we go through here and just kind of look through our list of make, model, and year, we'll see it here. We're dealing with a Jeep Compass PTS, which means push to start, AT, automatic transmission, year 2020 to 2022. So this is the one we're looking for. Yeah, good. And the heater just kicked off, so that should make it a bit more bearable. 20 to 2022, can high, can low. Okay, got it. And you'll notice right up here at the top of this chart, it says this is a Type 12 wiring chart. So when you flip through their PDF, you're going to scroll down until you get to the Type 12 wiring diagrams. But in this case, there are two of them that cover this Jeep. You'll notice at the top of the pages, this is a CH10. On top of the second page, CH12. So we found our Type 12 wiring diagram, and we found it for our CH12, which matches our wiring harness. So this is kind of what they're looking at, and this is a diagram that shows you all of the connections this wiring harness needs to make to connect into this module. Now there's a couple of things to note. Since this is a 2021, we have installed in this Jeep what is called a security gateway module. And what that is that you cannot access the ODB2 port and do things like read-write operations and anything that would be like an active command on the bus, if that makes sense. Unless you can authenticate to this security gateway and unlock it, if you come in through the ODB2 port, you only have read-only functionality. Now, one of the things you see in this diagram here is that this module needs to be tied into CAN high and CAN low. But if you do that through the ODB2 port, remember, you have restricted access through the gateway. So what they're having you do is tie these two wires off of their wiring harness into two pins, in this case on the security gateway module. And in a sense, what they're doing is they're tying into the CAN high and CAN low bus wires directly, basically bypassing this security module in order for this remote start unit to be able to start the vehicle. Now, you'll see a lot of connections here on this diagram that say NC after it. And I believe what that's going to mean is that no connection. So this wiring harness fits several vehicles. And on this particular make and model of Jeep, there are several connections on this harness that don't get connected to anything. And as a matter of fact, you see where they want you to have CAN high and CAN low tied into, comes into this connector here, splits off into several different options, because in other options of vehicles, you can find various points within the factory harness just to plug their connector into, and you get access into the bus. What I want to do is, rather than cut these connectors off and manually splice them into these two pins on the secure gateway, I'd rather do this install without having to splice something if at all possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this Jeep, and we're going to see if it has what some newer Chrysler products have, which is what they call a star connector, which gives me the ability, or us the ability, to put a connector on these two wires and just plug it in and be able to access the bus directly without having to do some kind of splice. I really don't like splicing factory wiring harnesses if I can get around it. And of course, they've got you making another connection into the horn, so that way this module can, honk the horn to kind of let you know the mode or the state that it's in. Now, other than these three here, they want you to tie in or splice in, everything else is plugged in through the factory harness. So the factory harness will plug into their connector, and it's kind of a Y connector that you can see here. And then this part will go into the light switch. This comes in off the factory harness, plugs into here, and you can see ultimately it ends up in one of, looks like 3 different connectors that are on this module here. So hopefully that helps if you're ever looking at this particular product and you download this PDF, and it's like I said, it's a bit daunting because it covers a lot, but just remember, the first thing that you're going to do is when you get to the second sheet here, of course, now okay, there we go. And you're going to look through, you're going to find your make, model, and year of what you're looking for, which in this case, we have it right here, 2022, and you can see they even make a reference here to that CAN high, CAN low. They give you the connector color, which is black, the connector type, which is a 12-pin, and they tell you which one of their wiring colors needs to be spliced into either CAN high or CAN low on the system side. But more importantly, that tells us that we're type 12 wiring chart. So you flip through until you find type 12. And once again, we had 2 type 12 wiring charts that covered this particular type of Jeep. This was a CH10, but remember, We needed, in our case, the CH12. So, yeah, hopefully that eliminates that little bit of confusion that may arise. Now, one thing, like I said, that we have to do is that we'll have to download some software and get this hooked up to a PC in order to program it. But before we do that, I wanted to show you something that we found in my son's Jeep currently. Rather interesting. Now, I searched for this on a forum, and it seems to be a lot of Jeep owners and some other makes and models of vehicles are finding these in their vehicle. And I'll just show you that real quick here. And what this is, when I ran the part number, those observant of you will notice this has an IMEI number. And if you're familiar with that is, the first thing that should pop into your mind is cell phone. This, when you run the part number, comes up as a Philips GPS tracker. Interesting enough, I'll show you where I found it. Just looking over the vehicle basically to figure out where I could start tying stuff in, and more importantly, looking for hopefully the presence of a star connector to access the bus with, so I don't have to do that splice. I noticed that I traced it down. Now, I've cut the tie wrap and pulled it out, which is why you see the wiring harness for it. But hopefully that doesn't blind you. We'll get that up into here so it's not in the camera's view all that much. But up here on the ODB2 port, I noticed there was a ground wire that was tied into an outlet, you can see there, and tied into ground, which threw me off because this Jeep is pretty much straight from the factory. There's been no aftermarket add-ons added onto this, which means this shouldn't be here, not from a factory setup. So I traced this back and zip tied back here onto the factory wiring harness was this harness that you see here. And they don't have it tied in to the bus, to the CAN bus. And on this one, it wouldn't do you any good because remember, the CAN bus through here is restricted by the security gateway inside the vehicle, so you wouldn't have any like read-write operations. So the only thing they're doing right now is just powering this. And yes, the first thing I did when I found it was pull the fuse out of it. And so what they did was they tapped power off the ODB2 connection, and how they did it, and I'll show you this later, was they used a Scotch lock of all things. It just infuriates me because they took battery positive off the ODB2 connection, put a Scotch lock on it, and you don't use Scotch locks. There was a better way of doing this. Now, you may be asking yourself, why is there a GPS tracker, unbeknownst to us, inside this Jeep? Well, after doing a little bit of research, it could be there for many reasons. One, if you have a lease or a loan on your vehicle and it's required by the lease or loan company, and usually it'll be listed in the print, in the fine print of your lease/loan agreement, they may require a GPS tracker on there so they know the location of the vehicle should they have to retrieve it. Another reason that it may have a separate GPS tracker is the dealership may put them in there to be able to track their inventory. Some dealerships will put it in there to help track the inventory while it's on the lot in case something gets stolen. And then if you purchase the vehicle, they may sell you like a low jack location service, which in that case, they'll just leave this in. But if it's not required by the leasing organization and you didn't purchase a low jack location service, which we didn't for this particular Jeep, they're supposed to remove this. So it may be that the dealership just either A, was lazy about removing this or just forgot about it, who knows. But again, you see those cut wires, it only had access to power, which means it was only sending its location and possible other data such as speed of vehicle and things of that nature. Pretty much anything that you'd be able to calculate based on GPS coordinates. So needless to say, this is going to get removed as part of this install. It will not be going back in to this vehicle. And since we know that we're the only owner of this, this had to be put in by the dealership, because no one else has had access to this vehicle, even for oil changes and such, other than the dealership. Now, you know, could somebody have, you know, gained access to the vehicle and installed this in about 5 minutes? Sure, it was, you know, it's relatively easy to do, but, you know, who knows? Either way, like I said, I did research it, and it seems like it's used a lot with dealerships and other services. But, again, just was, I don't know. It was rather concerning to find this on there and not be told this had been installed. But either way, it won't go back in. So with that being said, I digress. So what I'm going to do is look through the vehicle and see if we can find, go ahead and pop the hood on this guy and see if we can find like a star connector or some way to access the bus without splicing a set of wires to do so. We also have another item to look at, and I'll get the wiring harness out and we'll kind of go through it as well. But let's get this up, and let's see. Another thing the kit comes with, and it's for a safety feature, is it's got a little pin. So that way what you do is you install the pin, and when you raise the hood, if it's running under remote start, it's designed as a safety feature to kill the engine. Now I noticed that this particular Jeep here kind of already has one of those pins pre-installed that lets the Jeep know that the hood has been raised. Now I purchased some other items that we'll take a look at, but basically what I'm looking at trying to do is figuring out a way that we can, you know, generate the needed signal when we raise the hood like this, so it performs this necessary safety function and kills the remote start. So we got that item to look into. I got to see if I can find that bus connector to tie into, and then we'll have the horn that we need to look into tying into as well. But let me do this next. Let me get you up into a tripod here, and then we'll open up that wiring harness and kind of go through it a little bit, and then I'll start looking behind some panels and seeing what I can find. And welcome back. Again, you kind of have to forgive the background noise. The heat in the shop is on right now, so hopefully it's not too much of an issue. So I've got their wiring harness kind of laid out here, and let me make some room and get this battery charger out of here. I'll put a link in the description to this. I like this battery charger. It's kind of a copy of the of several other makes out there as well, but it works good. Anyway, I digress. So this is their wiring harness. Again, that was the CH12 that we're dealing with, and this is the part that plugs into the existing factory ODB2 connector and then comes out to a new connector you see here. So this will plug into the factory side, and this will be coming out below the dash to, you know, plug normal readers and stuff into. Now, this was that CAN bus connection I was telling you about. You see right here, it's going to be kind of hard to see it, but you notice this is JS1. I had to zoom in on the PDF, but the other side of this connector says JS3, and you'll notice it has a VS 9, 10, 11, and 12 connectors on it. But their connector, if you look at it, you see JS1, JS2. That's what we're looking for. You'll notice this is JS2, not JS3. So what you have to do is, in an extra bag that came with the wiring harness, there's all of these goodies here. This came in a separate bag in the same box. If we just push this out of the way, you can see that we've got all of this. If we look on our diagram, again, we're looking for a connector that should have had VS 9, 10, 11, and 12. Watch this. VS 9 and 10. VS 11 and 12. Big old long set of wires, as you can see. Actually, That's probably about 6 foot of wiring. Comes out to this connector here. What they want you to do, and they don't exactly clearly show this, is that you have to take their first harness, the main harness, unplug JS2 from JS1, and plug in this connector. Then you end up with JS1 to JS3, which this now matches our diagram. If you remember, they want you to take it a step further. They want you to cut it here because you've got two different CAN bus setups, it looks like, on this same cable. And the ones they want you to use is brown with red and brown with yellow. So brown with red and brown with yellow. So they want you to come down here and remove 9 and 10 and splice this in to the CAN high and CAN low. So you see where it's wide right here? It looks like that's where they got you snipping it and just using those two there. Now, interesting enough, they've got that wide. Yeah, 9 and 10, whatever. You can see that these were probably meant for a type of vehicle where you would just plug this into like an existing harness connector, but because of that secure gateway and them on this kit needing the ability to issue commands to the bus, that's why. So they're having you cut these two off, taking these two wires and splicing this in to the factory harness. But this is where we want to change things. I want to be able to take this, nip them, and see if we can find a factory star connector of which I can then cannibalize another kit that I haven't showed you yet, and basically solder, heat shrink into here and be able to plug directly into the vehicle's bus without having to splice, which is the goal here. So to recap on that, this CH12, for what we needed, initially it comes configured as JS1 to JS2. We need JS1 to JS3. That means we have to unplug JS2 you see on the main harness and replace it with this connector, as you can see, is JS3. And then they want us to use the two brown with red and brown with yellow, that'll go to a CAN high and CAN low in the factory harness somewhere. And the rest of this harness that you can see, again, let's get this out of here to try to make this a bit easier to see. These extra wires, again, because this is a multiple vehicle kit. Per their diagram, this purple wire you see that has no connector on it does not get used. So we're going to toss that off to the side. There's two other connectors that do not get used off this harness, and that is going to be VS. I need some extra light here because my vision is just crap. VS5 and VS6, it looks like. Yes, so VS5 on this connector and VS6, these aren't going to be used either, at least not in this application. So rather than just have connectors that are going to be laying inside the vehicle, zip tied somewhere, not used, I'd rather just see about, nipping these off, or see if we can just pull them out of this harness all together and not use them versus just having them there. If I have to, then what we'll do is we'll just nip them maybe somewhere in here and just heat shrink them and seal them up, and that way, again, at least you don't have a bunch of extra connectors dangling somewhere. But this is the end. These two ends plug into the control module. And the two we're going to use on this one is VS7 and VS8. which according to their wiring diagram, 7 and 8, these go to the light switch. So I'll show you that connection when we get up to it. And then obviously we already covered this. This is ODB2 connection, so this is a Y connector for it. You'll plug the factory ODB2 connector in here, and this gives you a new female end, and then plug scan tools and normal diagnostics into. And on this end, VS1 and VS2, looking at their diagram, this is going to go to the push button to start connector. So it's going to allow it to be in line with the push button to start. Again, that's how it's going to start the vehicle, is by looks like simulating pushing that start button for you. And these tie into the module that goes in the back of that headlight switch that we just was talking about a second ago. And this is what's going to allow it to turn on the running lights and things of that nature to let you know that the vehicle is started. So the next thing I want to do is dig around the Jeep a little bit again and see if I can find that star connector I'm looking for to allow us to not have to splice into something. So let me poke around that for a little bit, and then I'll bring you back and see if I can find something. One moment. And welcome back. Well, it's been a few moments for you, but about a week for me. And I've just been kind of crawling over this 2021 Jeep Compass here, looking for what is sometimes in the other vintage and years of Jeeps, which is a star connector. Because if you remember, one of the things this remote start wants us to do is tap into can high and can low. And at least on these instructions, the way they want you to do it is to tap into the security gateway module connector on pins 5 and 12. I just want to show you that here. So here's pin 5. It's part of circuit D351. It's can C positive, so basically can high. Pin 12 is part of circuit D350. Can C negative, basically can low. So what, in a sense, what they're doing, just tapping directly into the can C bus. Now there's multiple can circuits within this vehicle. There's a diagnostic can, the can C you see here. There's a can, I think it's called IHS, and so on and so forth. But what we need is can C, or can high, can low. And again, based on this pin out here, which is 5 and 12, what they're tapping into is can C. Now, not having the star connector, like I was hoping I could find within the interior of this Jeep Compass, it's kind of led me to change things a bit. Now, I don't want to splice directly into a factory harness. I don't like doing that unless there's just no other option to do so. So while looking online, I found this put out by Z Automotive. I'll put a link in the description. What this is a harness to extend the wiring to the secure gateway module. So in a sense, what you do is you unplug the factory connectors from the secure gateway module and just plug them in here. This then plugs into the module and extends it out. You know, looks to be maybe what, a foot or so, about the length of those wires. So what this is going to allow us to do is, since we need to tap into a wiring harness, I'm going to trace out what is pins 5 and 12 on this connector down to here on this end, and I'm going to just basically cut, splice, and solder and splice into this extension harness. This way we're not splicing into the factory one, and if we ever want to remove this remote start system, we just unplug the factory connectors from there, plug it directly back into the security module, remove this, and it makes for a pretty easy deinstall. And it makes it like the rest of this harness for this remote start unit, in which it actually uses factory connectors and, you know, gets rid of this, at least splicing into the factory harness, and, you know, again, allows us to kind of splice this up instead of factory. So let's see. What I'm going to do is, again, I'm just going to trace down pins 5 and 12 and get them spliced in accordingly, according to this color code. So we want the brown, red, and the brown and yellow, which comes off of our remote start harness here. Because in a sense, what they want you to do is cut off these connectors, this VS9 and VS10, because they won't be used, and just use this wire accordingly. So they want us to use brown and red and brown and yellow. Yeah, so there's your brown and red, brown and yellow. And again, if you remember, these are just wide into the same two. So what I'm going to do is come back here before they did the splice and wide it, cut it here, and then take our connector here, find the appropriate connectors, and again, I'll show you all this when all this is done, but I'm just going to let you know what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to show the soldering job itself because it's kind of one of the cardinal sins of making a YouTube videos to show anything involving welding or soldering. Again, it just kind of is what it is. Plus, soldering's boring, but I will show you the kind of aftermath of this. Now, you probably noticed that this extension harness uses all the same color wiring. What I'm going to do is just use our meter in continuity mode, just have it emit a tone, and just use our test probes from our AES wave kit to kind of probe out these pins and making sure I'm getting a hold of pin 5 and 12 like we're looking for. But again, let me get cracking on this and I'll bring you back in a bit. One moment. So just want to show you what I'm doing here. You can just kind of see one of these. So you can see what we're doing. We're just kind of splicing in their harness, their 2 wires, into that wiring harness pin that we needed there. And we're doing we're doing the splice down here at the end where the factory connector is going to plug into, again, just for ease of use, because this end is the end that goes all the way up, kind of midway up the steering column and behind a bunch of stuff to actually plug into the secure gateway module. So it's not as convenient to tap in there as it is here. But you can see here, we've got 3 wires joined together. That's our original. I'm going to slide a piece of heat shrink tubing over and shrink this up, and I'm going to do the same thing with this one, which will go to the number 12 pin. Just with soldering anything, just make sure that you put your heat shrink on before you make your solder connection. Ask me how I know. Trust me, I've done that several times where you make a nice solder joint and you look down on the bench and realize you forgot to put your heat shrink on it. But let me get to work on this other wire and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. So welcome back. You can see our tie-ins to our connectors have been soldered and heat shrinked. And once again, brown, red went to pin 5, and brown and yellow went to pin 12. So I'm just going to cover these up now. Wrap some fresh cloth tape around that, and then also I'm going to come in here and kind of put the wiring down like this. Once the tape's in place, just going to, since we have excess of this wire from the manufacturer for the remote start harness, I'm just going to kind of loop that in like that, give it a little bit of slack, and put a tie wrap on that to kind of just help secure these joints so they don't move around excessively. So let me get this finished up and I'll bring you back. And welcome back. So I'll show you what we've been doing here. Last we left off, we were splicing their wiring for can high and can low for can C, or the circuit can C, into this extension harness for the secure gateway. So you can see that we've got our splices now wrapped up in here with some fabric tape, or fabric, I should say fabric harness tape. And as you saw, we just kind of looped in a little bit of extra wire just to give it some strain release and secured it with a zip tie. So what we'll do is we'll go underneath the steering column where the secure gateway is, unplug the factory connectors, plug these into the secure gateway, and then plug the factory connectors in down here. Now, if you remember from the previous video segments, this had revisions for two types of, basically the wiring harness that they give you with the remote start kit is meant for multiple different vehicles. And as such, they didn't need what they call VS11 and VS12, which were the blue CAN wires. Obviously, that's for a different application other than what we're looking at. And just to show you here, yeah, see, VS11 and VS12, which come off that JS2 connection, if you remember from the previous video, no connection weren't used. So I just went ahead and cut those off and just heat shrink the ends of it to seal them up. That way we didn't have the excess wire just kind of dangling in, or have to, fold it and zip tie it up if those connections weren't going to be used. So I just removed them from that harness. And then off their main harness, we spent some time going through this. If you see this here, remember, this had a JS2, JS1 to JS2 that you saw in their diagram here. But remember, their JS2, which was a part of the harness, gets split here, and that's when you plug in this supplemental JS3 here. So there's your JS1. We split it from JS2, and you can see that we just secured it and wrapped it underneath some more of this fabric loom tape just to secure it and kind of cover up the pin since it wasn't being used. And then what we'll do is we'll come in with our JS3 and mate it up to our JS1. So that is the provision for our CAN circuit. We also went through here, since it wasn't being used as well, and you'll see this, what used to be VS5 and 6, it looks like. And I'll show you those here. VS5, VS6, per their diagram, wasn't being used, and it was just a single wire that split between these two. Since these two connectors also weren't going to be used for our application, I just removed it, tossed those off to the side. And where that connection was inside of their main harness here. A little bit further down, right about in here, they had a splice, and I could cut it at the splice, and that allowed me just to remove those two connectors in this entire piece. So we got that all taped up. We went ahead and put a tie wrap in here to secure these two pieces together, because these are the two connections that go into this module. That is the brains of the operation there that allow it to remote start the vehicle. And also, on per their diagram, this purple wire wasn't going to be used. It was also a no connection. So you can see that I just kind of wrapped it around the harness here and also secured it with a zip tie. Again, just went through it and removed all the unused connections from the harness just to kind of try and neaten this up a little bit. Let's get this out of the way here. And then what we end up with is this. And then we'll make that connection there, which again goes to that supplemental harness for our CAN connection, in which we went out and got this, once again, this extension to the secure gateway so that we can tap our CAN connection into this extension harness rather than the factory harness. So I admit we're kind of adding a lot more to this install than what the manufacturer's calling for in the documentation. But again, just trying to make it as neat as possible without hacking into the factory harness, but also give us the ability, should we need to remove this system, we can just remove all the associated harnesses, plug everything back into the factory connectors, and then we're good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to grab a shop light. I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to show you where that secure gateway module is at, and we're going to work on getting this connected in to make sure that we can get this done and out of the way. And then once this is done out of the way, if you remember, one of the first things they want us to do is to program this module. in which you need this adapter here. This is the iDatastart ADS USB ECO flashing tool for these iDatastart modules, as you can see there. So it comes with this kind of USB or pseudo kind of USB connection with a little 4-port pin in the back. Comes with that cable, and it looks like it's the only connector this is going to match up to is going to be this 4-pin connector here. We can then load the firmware on this, set our parameters and our settings, and then once we have the firmware on this, then we can proceed forward with getting everything plugged into this and proceed forward with the programming. But let me get a shop light and I'll bring you back and we'll look at getting this connected. One moment. And welcome back. So hopefully you can see that up there, and the shop light isn't blinding you out too much. I'll see if I can get my hand up in here to point at it. It's kind of a pain because of where it's at. Let me get a pointing device here. You'll see me coming in with a piece of trim here at the top of the screen. But right up here, right there, you see me kind of touching it with this piece of trim. That is our secure gateway module. And that is what we want to disconnect and plug that extension harness into. And that's going to do a couple things for us by using that extension harness. And I'll explain that here in a bit. But it's going to be kind of hard for me to show you me doing this. But literally all I'm doing is going to be unplugging 2 connectors. And then plugging in that extension harness. So it's not too terrible. But I'll come back and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. One moment. And in case you're curious, once again, we're still below the steering column here. Just be careful when you're in this area, because at least on this particular compass, we do have an airbag module that's sitting right here. So we need to be careful when we're playing around with this stuff. And you can see in relation to the steering column here, you can see where that box is right there, kind of like in the middle of your screen. Once again, let me just kind of point at that. Let me get my little piece of trim I was using here. There we go. So you can see I'm touching it. It's right there. So it's probably about halfway up on the back side of where you see the steering column there. So yeah, getting access to it, looks like you can kind of reach in through here to get access to those connectors, or maybe come up through the bottom here where you see the bottom of the shop light. See what you're seeing here. There we go. You can kind of come up here where you see my finger, so to speak, and maybe reach up to be able to grab those connectors. Okay, but with that being said, one moment. So let me go ahead and take care of this, and then I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So it's going to be kind of hard for you to see that module, but that module back up in there, you can see that it's got those connectors in it for the extension harness. And let me see, just trying to get you some light in here without swamping you out. These are the factory ones that was plugged into the secured gateway originally, and I've just kind of pulled them forward into this cubby hole you see here, and it's going to plug into the other side of that extension harness, which you can see those 2 connectors sitting there. Now the nice thing is it kind of allows you to relocate these 2 connectors and have easier access to them here. So as a side effect of this, what that extension harness allows you to, in a sense, do is gain access to those secure gateway connections a bit easier, rather than having to reach all the way up and grab them off the secure gateway module. And the reason why that might be important to you is that not only did, again, we just utilize it to make it easier to tap into that bus But for certain scan tools that do not or are not supported to authenticate in order for you to unlock the secure gateway and be able to do things like bi-directional controls and such, it allows you access to those two connectors, because if you've heard them before, and I think it's called like an 8+1 or 8+10 or something. I'll put a link in the description. I'll add a little verbiage to the video to correct it, but it looks like a little Y adapter harness. And what they do is, in order for scan tools that can't authenticate to unlock the secure gateway, but you still want to do something other than read only, bi-directional controls, things of that nature, they typically have you unplug the connectors from the secure gateway, plug it into this adapter harness, and it comes out to an ODB2 port, much like this one you see here, but allows you access to the bus. It basically, takes the secure gateway out of the loop and allows you to do what you need to do. And then when you unplug your adapter, you plug it back in your secure gateway and away you go. Because the reason why you can't use this ODB2 with a vehicle that has a secure gateway is its CAN communication pins come directly through the secure gateway. That's where this one is wired to. That's why when you plug into this one, if you can't authenticate and get that module to unlock, you're basically restricted to read only. But by having that extension harness in there and kind of having these factory connectors you see here pulled forward a little bit, it makes it easier to gain access to these without having to reach all the way up behind that steering column you see there to gain access to it. So again, that was kind of the intended purpose of that extension harness. But again, we're just utilizing it because it gains us access to the bus. So I'm going to complete the connections that you see here. I'm going to plug these factory connectors into the into this end of this extension harness and get connectivity back to that secure gateway. And I'll bring you back for the next piece. One moment. Welcome back. So you can see that we've got our connectors, our factory connectors. You can see that one connector right there. So we've got our secure gateway module plugged back into our extension harness. And you remember this brown and red and brown and yellow twisted pair of wire. That's going to be our tap into our CAN high and CAN low into our remote start module. And you can see here we've just got the ODB2 popped out of its bracket as part of its install, getting ready to put the wiring harness piece in, or for the main wiring harness of the remote start. But if you remember that GPS tracking module that we found in here, you can see where they tapped into the positive using a darn Scotch lock. I hate these things. And don't get me wrong, in my youth I used them as well until I discovered the error in my ways. But what I'm going to need to do is kind of pop that off and get this splice piece out of this Scotch lock and see how badly they've chewed into that positive, because it's battery positive is what that is off the ODB2 connector. I might be able to just patch it up with some liquid electrical tape depending on how bad it is, or we may just have to come in here, kind of cut it, strip it, and solder and heat shrink it. I won't know until I can pop this lock apart, but just kind of show you what I'm doing here. That's going to be working on next. I'm going to get this ground wire out of here, get that positive off, and this is the wiring harness that went to that GPS tracker. Again, they were only using it, must have only been using it for its tracking capability, because its ability to talk to the bus, you can see they cut the wires, and it wouldn't have worked in this implementation anyway unless they tapped directly in to the CAN circuits, because of that secure gateway. Wouldn't have allowed them to do so, or at least not through that ODB2 port. They would have had to tap into the CAN somewhere else, which is probably the reason why they were only using this for tracking purposes rather than trying to use it to disable the vehicle or something along that nature. But anyway, I digress. I'm going to work on getting that harness out of here, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So yeah, it was just a little bit nicked. It's the standard Scotch lock type blade that was in there. So you can see, just hit it with a little bit of a liquid electrical tape, on that end just to help seal it up, and it should be fine. Just give that some time to dry up. As for the rest of the connections on our harness, is that you have one connector, which is this one, which in this case is VS6 and VS7. This loops in through the connector that would normally go to the headlight switch, which obviously we have removed right now. And the other side of the connectors that need to be made, in this case, once again, in this case it's VS1 and VS2 that go in line with the push to start ignition button that you see. That'll be behind here. It's probably kind of hard to show you that connector, but it's fairly easy to reach up. Let me see what you're seeing here. Hopefully you can see that. Well, you may not be able to see it. I don't know if I can get the camera angle in there to catch the back side of that connector, but yeah, it's not too bad. It's a fairly small connector on the back of that push to start button switch, and it just loops in through that, because what this device is going to do is simulate pushing the start button, which is why it needs to be looped into that. And then of course you've got also another Y or loop through on the ODB2 connector. This just has two tabs on the side that pop it out of the holder that you see here, and that connector will plug into the black one that you see here, and then this one will end up popping into this bracket and coming out for the normal service port. You can see a lot of those pins just pass through, and they're only actually grabbing a couple and tapping into what they need here. So I'm gonna go work on that. Like I said, it's not too terrible. I'll show you when it's all done, but it's literally just plugging in the factory harness into their connector, taking the output of that and plugging it back into the original device, whether it be the headlight switch they're typing into, the push to start button they're tapping into, which is literally, you can reach it right up underneath here. It's fairly easy to get to that connector, and of course the ODB2 port itself. So let me get these connections made and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our Y/splice plugged into what will be then plugged into our headlight switch. We've got our connector looped into our push to start, or aka ignition button, and we've got our connector looped into our ODB2 port, as you can see here. So you can see a couple of tie wraps. One, I just put a tie wrap around this piece where this connector comes out for this ODB2, and just zip tied it to a harness back there just to give it some support so it wasn't flopping around. Also did the same thing to the two connectors here that went to that extension cable that goes up to that secure gateway. Again, just zip tied it to an existing harness on the side of it, because there's a couple pieces of metal. I'll see if I can get the flashlight to point to one of them. You'll see it kind of like right back here where you see the tip of the flashlight. You see where that silver space is at back there, but there's a couple pieces of metal that got some pretty sharp edges on it, so I just wanted to kind of zip tie and get this part of the harness away from that, just so it doesn't have a chance of going back there and rubbing against anything. Now we need to take some of the slack out of this harness and kind of maybe use a few more zip ties, clean everything up, make it look nice and neat. And judging where this wiring harness is going to sit, you know, that module could either sit all the way over here on the left-hand side of the dash, or over here on, over here on the left, or over there on the right. We'll make that decision once we get it programmed, kind of where best to stash it. I'm thinking, I don't know, possibly right there, up in that cubby hole. If it'll go, there's a nice deep space back here that kind of has nothing in it. That might work up in here, or we might, and we have plenty of space where we can actually weasel that module in, like right back. Let me see what you're seeing here. There we go, right back behind this side panel here. Anyway, the next step that we need to do now that we have our wiring harness in place, and the instructions kind of wanted you to do this before the install, but to be honest with you, I wanted to get the wiring harness all situated and in place first, so I kind of knew what that was going to look like. But the next piece is going to be getting the Flash software downloaded and get that module programmed. So I'm going to go do that now. I'm going to get that that Flash software downloaded and kind of walk through that process. I'll bring you along for the ride because it's going to be kind of interesting. The instructions don't really cover the flashing of that module all too well. I mean, they do a decent job here of covering, you know, what the step-by-step needs to be once you have it in the vehicle. Yeah, valet mode, programming procedures. Yeah. Module, navigation procedures. Yeah, module navigation sheet. This is all the different options, so to speak. We'll have to review those. They don't really cover what all needs to be done as far as the fly. Okay, that's what I'm possibly looking for there. Nope, that's module reset procedure. We don't need to do that. Takeover procedures. Takeover procedure if you're using a tip, in other words, a key instead of a push button to start. And there's our installation checklist. So let me do this. Let me do a bit more reading up on what needs to happen as far as the programming of this module now that we've got our wiring situated. And then I'll bring you back for the next piece. One moment. And welcome back. So I'm going through the first part of this, which was also in the instructions sent to me by Crutchfield, which is I've signed up for an account and created an account at this weblinkupdater.com, downloaded the WebLink desktop software, in this case for a Windows machine, and I'm just doing the install on that now. So it's going to install the WebLink desktop, it's going to put a WebLink driver on there, and then finally the Cypress USB serial driver. I'm going to proceed forward with that. Yep, install directory is fine. Yep, WebLink installation driver. And I'm doing this before I plug in anything. Windows tends to get a little finicky if sometimes you plug a device in before you have the driver installed. Say yes, that's the driver that we want. Yep, WebLink USB port. I don't want to always trust software from this developer, so I'm going to uncheck that. I don't like that being checked for me, but in this case I'll trust it this time because I know what this is. Once again, I do not want to always trust that installer. So there we go, it's got our drivers installed, it says they're ready to use. Okay. Cypress USB serial driver install now. Of course, we have to agree to the licensing agreement. Yes, serial driver install. And finish. Run WebLink desktop. Let's see what we got here. Let's see if it redirects me to a login. Okay, so this is why we had to create a login. So let me get myself logged in and I'll bring you back. And welcome back. So we've got ourselves logged in. This is using the desktop software. What I'm looking for is going to be the WebLink RS remote flash remote starter. That is what we're dealing with. Okay, sorry, could not detect device. So I'm going to get you, let me get your tripod set up here. What I'm going to do, there we go, gotcha. Looks like it might be a little, there we go. Okay, so I'm just going to take, I've gotten their cable plugged into their adapter. I'm going to plug this into the USB port, and I'm going to plug the other end of the cable into the only port on this device that it will fit, which is on this side here. You'll see that 4-port device there. So let's see. What I'm plugging this into is a USB port. This is just a USB extension cable, but it plugs directly into one of the USB ports on this particular laptop. So there you go. Oh, I don't know if you heard that, but the PC just recognized this serial device. So what they're doing is it's just converting a USB device. So it's a USB to serial driver is basically what this device is. I'm sorry, USB to serial hardware device, and that's what that USB to serial driver was for. And in case you're curious, if we come into properties here, nope, I do not want properties. I want this PC. Just help if I was in the right spot. And if we come into what I want is device manager. It's right there in front of me. Okay, see that USB serial port? I bet you money if I unplug it, that will disappear. And it did. Plug it back into the USB port. And there we go. There's our USB to serial port COM5. So that's basically just, it's a USB port that they're converting to a serial port via an emulator. Okay, so now I'm going to take their device. Had a little bit of a debris in there. Go ahead and plug this in again to the only port it looks like this is going to fit in. Okay, so I've got that plugged in. I'll try that again. Okay, so it found the device. So that is in fact our remote starter. Matches our part number, CMCHXA0. See, no firmware installed. Okay, so that's what that's the first thing we need to fix, is that we need to install firmware into here. So I'm going to go with, see, vehicle protocols, firmware, quick configuration, features, kind of cool. So it looks like we're going to do a couple things with this software. One, we're going to load firmware on it, and then then configure it. In other words, with the options and settings that we want. Finally, bring it over the machine, bring it over to the vehicle, do a series of programming with it, and then come back here to finish it up. So let's see. There's not really, let's see, guides and wires. Anything in here? No. Okay, so it actually won't even let me go forward. So the only option I have right now, see, I can't even click firmware. It won't even let me. So it looks like it's trying to guide us to where we need to go. So let me just try this. Configure new module. And this is going to be in a Jeep. This is going to be a 2021 Jeep. Going to be a Compass. It does have push to start, and it is an automatic. Okay, choose a protocol. So, I need to start RF kit and drone. No, we actually don't have that. We don't have what they have suggested. We don't have this RF kit and drone. Factory remote. RF kit plus my start. We don't have that. We don't have the RF kit. We do not have the RF kit. RF kit. Nope. Connected RF kit and my car. No, 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 no. No to any of these. Really, the only one that we have is we're going to choose protocol of factory remote. So this should set up that device to be able to be remote start the vehicle using the factory fob. The other options you saw there is if you were going to use their RF module with their set of key fobs. So since we're not doing that, that's why we chose a factory fob. So you can see it's recommending the firmware that we use. It's also telling us down here the required accessories for installation, which was our wiring harness that we looked at earlier. And we use a wiring harness of THR CH12 ADS. So yes, we're using the, if you remember, we're using the CH12 version of that. Optional accessories, yeah, this is if you're using their RF modules, which again, we're not. We're using the factory fob. So we're going to say use the recommended. We are using the CH12 T-Harness. Continue. Okay. Factory keyless remote start sequence. So right now it's set to, if we were to hit the lock button on the factory fob 3 times. So that's what we're, or you can do, you can see here, you could do a lock, unlock, lock. So I'm going to leave it lock, lock, lock. Remote start runtime of 15 minutes is more than enough in my opinion. And let's see. Well, let's save and go to features menu because I'm just curious what's inside features. Okay. Door lock control on, door lock unlock is on, OEM alarm on. It looks like these are all the defaults. Trunk hatch release on, power lift gate if we had it, which we don't. Yeah, okay. Power sliding door again, we don't. And what about advanced features? What do we have? Okay, so advanced features. Disarm, unlock before start, no. Relock after start, no. Relock after shutdown. So you can see you can kind of come in here and tailor this to, looks like apparently to do certain things like after it remote starts, it'll relock all the doors. Relock after shutdown, meaning if you were to run it, it's full remote start timer. Once that timer runs out, it'll, you know, pulse it and tell it to lock all the doors again. Takeover, normal takeover is fine. Disarm, lock, flush, start. Okay, so these are all the defaults. I don't feel like touching these defaults right now. I think we're going to go with the defaults for now, and if we have to, we'll change this as needed. You see, you can see wait for start delay for diesels, and why that is diesels use gold plugs, especially when it's cold, so you can come here and crank that delay up. Save and go to guides. Okay. Vehicle wiring information, which we already have. It's actually kind of cool. You can download this software and it'll give you all the guides and installs and PDFs and things of that nature. We don't need the guide, we have it. We don't need this because we have it. So if we go to Flash, so we are using a Jeep 2021 Compass. Push to start automatic. Lock, lock, lock for the OEM. And okay, let's just say flash your device. And this should load some firmware. And I do see LED activity on the device. I don't want to touch it because it is in the process of doing a flash update. Okay, flash completed successfully. So this is start answering some of the gaps that questions I had actually. So we're going to disconnect from the computer. We're going to connect device to the vehicle and follow the programming instructions, and then we're going to come back and hook the device back up to the computer to finish the process. So this process was mainly to get the firmware on there and I guess change any of the features if you wanted to change them. So let me do that. Let me get shut down. We'll get back over the vehicle, and we'll continue this process. One moment. Okay, welcome back. So it's going to be a little bit of a process here. Hopefully I'll be able to kind of film this, but what I'm going to do is obviously follow your instructions. What you can see here is, having you open and close the driver's door just to wake up the bus, and then they press unlock on the OEM remote. If the vehicle is not equipped with an OEM remote, then they have you pressing the program button on the box. But we have an OEM remote for this one. So they want us to open and close the door just to wake up the bus. And then we'll, let's see. Yep, and then we wait until the LED flashes green. Yeah, wait for LED 1 will flash green once. If LED 1 does not flash green, repeat step 2. Set the ignition to on. If it does, wait for LED 1 to turn solid red. Proceed to step 6. If LED 1 flashes green rapidly, proceed to step 10. So we're either going to turn the ignition off and proceed with a series of steps, or set the ignition to the off position. And then disconnect power last from the module. And then that's when we connect back up to the PC. So depending on how this device reacts, it's just a series of repeating a few steps until we eventually get to the point where LED 1 turns solid red, proceed to step 6, but looks like we want LED 1 to flash green rapidly, and then we proceed to step 10, where we shut the vehicle off, and then we proceed forward with hooking it back up to a PC. So with that being said, let me get to cracking on this, and then I'll bring it back. But just to show that to you again, press an unlock on the OEM remote, and then let's see. It looks like once we press unlock on the OEM remote, LED flashes green. It flashes between green and red. That takes approximately 10 seconds. And we'll wait for LED 1 to flash green once. If it doesn't, we repeat step 2. If LED 1 flashes green once, we go to step 4, which is set the ignition to on. And then LED 1, if it turns solid red, we go to 6. We do some additional steps. Looks like we're trying to get, basically just repeating or doing some additional steps to get LED 1 to flash green rapidly. Then when we have that, we'll turn it off and bring it back to the PC. So let me get cracking on this, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. Okay, so it's a little bit tricky, which is kind of why I didn't have you on camera, because it was kind of hard to keep up with the camera and follow their instructions at the same time. But this initial, when you close and open the door and you hit the unlock on the remote one time, I wasn't getting the light to flash green one time so I can proceed forward. And what I had to do was that when you disconnect this and you're bringing it back to the PC, there is a warning that they want you to disconnect power last. Well, when I hooked this up to the vehicle, I hooked power up first and then the data line. So what I had to do was disconnect all this, unplug it, hook the data line in, hook the power up first and then data. And then when I open and close the door like they suggested, and then hit the unlock button, I got the green flash. And then I proceed forward with hitting the ignition on, work through their steps there until it rapidly blinked green. So LED 1 will flash green rapidly, which is what we got. We turned the ignition off. We disconnected data first. and then power from this module. And then now we're going to connect back up to the PC and continue with the programming, which is where you see us at here. So I'm going to say continue extended programming. And there we go. Okay, it looks like we're done with that piece. So, warning, do not press programming button. Connect power first and then connect module to vehicle. Okay, so we need to bring it back to the car at this point. Then we're going to hit the ignition to the on position. Wait for LED 1 to turn solid green for 2 seconds. And then turn the ignition off. So let's do that. So I'm going to disconnect this from the PC once again. Okay, let me pause you and I'll bring you back. And welcome back. So I know the lighting's in here is terrible. I apologize. So we're back at our vehicle. And what I'm going to do is hook this module back up. And it looks like then they want us to set the ignition to the on position. Again, wait for that LED to turn solid green for 2 seconds and then turn the ignition off and we'll be done. But you see the note here that do not press programming button, which we won't when we connect it to the vehicle. And then connect module to computer, set ignition on, and yeah, so just don't hit the programming button. And they want to connect power first. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to connect data, connect power, turn the ignition on, wait for that LED 1 to blink, turn solid green for 2 seconds, and then I'm going to turn the ignition off and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So it did as designed. Let's see. We were able to plug the module in, turn the ignition on, light flashed green for 2 seconds, and then we powered the ignition off. So let's see what happens. Okay. Interesting. Not seeing it do much of anything, even though the programming procedure is supposedly complete. Functionality mode. Okay, interesting. Oh, okay, let me poke at a couple things and I'll bring you back and let you know what I can find. But clearly she is not starting like she should be. One moment. And welcome back. So I figured out the issue as to why it didn't remote start for us on the previous clip. There was two reasons. One, all doors to include hood and trunk need to be shut and locked. When I was trying this in the previous clip, I had the driver's door open. It has to be shut. And again, all doors locked prior to doing this. The second reason is just by habit, usually when I lock a vehicle, the way we have ours configured is that when they lock, we have it set to chirp the horn. And I'm waiting for that audible horn chirp to tell me the door is locked and I can continue. I can't do that with this because it's too long of a delay between locks, and I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to hit this in rapid succession. And you hear it started. So right now, you see it flash the lights as a status symbol to let us know it's now running the vehicle. And it's the module that's running the vehicle, and how it's doing it is that it's basically simulating that we just stepped into it and used this fob to start it, even though this fob is not in the vehicle. And I'll explain a bit more about how I think I know what they're doing. I think I know what they're doing here. But then there is a takeover procedure. So you need to tell that module that you've now gotten into the vehicle and you're going to take over operation for it. And I'll show that to you. But for now, I'm just going to reach in and just kind of stop it manually. And this is going to make it a little bit mad. And by mad, I mean you're going to see it flash some lights here. Because it's going to, and why it's doing that, you'll see it flash some lights here a couple of times. Because it's throwing an error code. Because it's getting mad because I powered it off the way I powered it off. I mean, no harm, no foul. It's not going to hurt anything. But to explain what I was talking about earlier, after it's remote started, and it's probably going to be a crappy display of the screen, I apologize, you have to do what they call a takeover. In other words, you've remote started it from inside the house or whatever, and you're ready to get in the vehicle and take off and go. If you don't do this, what will happen is the vehicle will turn off if you don't do the takeover procedure after a period of time. So you can see here that you got a time restriction. You have to complete steps 2 to 5 in 45 seconds. So what happens is you've got it remote started, you're running. You're going to take your OEM fob in this case. We're going to unlock, we're going to enter the vehicle, and we're going to open the driver's door, enter the vehicle, then we're going to close the door. Once we're inside the vehicle, what we're going to do, and let me scroll this up here. I'm sorry, down. Once we're inside the vehicle, press and release the brake pedal. Once you press and release the brake pedal, your takeover is complete. In other words, you have told the module it no longer needs to be the one starting and running the vehicle for you. So again, just to reiterate that, come in, unlock the door, get in, close the door, push the brake one time, let up on the brake, takeover complete. You now have operational control of the vehicle. So that's it in a nutshell. What I have to do now, and I'll show this to you, is I need to go through and finish tidying up the wires, but it's not anything I need to get on video. I'll just kind of let you know what I'm going to do here. Is, got to put the lower kick panel back on. Obviously get this to where it needs to go so it's not just hanging out here. Tidy all this up, and like I said, there's enough slack in it. You can kind of get it back here in this little cubby spot, or maybe over here more towards the center console side of it. Looks like it'll also fit, but I got to put that and put some trim pieces and stuff back in. When you take this lower panel out, and I should have said this at the beginning of the video, I apologize. There are 2 Torx bits on this side. There's a piece of trim. You're going to pop this piece of trim off first. Take these 2 Torx pieces out. There's 2 bolts that come up through the bottom of here. So you're going to remove this piece of trim, take 2 Torx screws out here, take 2 bolts out the bottom here, and then the rest of this is just plastic clips, and the rest of this panel will come off. I've got to put some panels back on the passenger side, and I only removed them because I was looking for a star connector to tap into that bus. Again, before we want this route of tapping into the CAN bus via the remote gateway. But as you see, it does work. It seems to work well. And to kind of go over my theory with you as to what they're doing, because I've had a very similar device to this in the past that used the lock and kind of the same setup procedure on a Ram 1500 years ago. What I think they're doing is Remember when you put that module into the car at first and they had you run through the programming steps of waiting for certain lights to turn certain colors while you have the fob in the vehicle and you're turning the ignition on and off. And then you come back and you finish the procedure. So remember, we hooked the module up to the vehicle, up to the PC. We told it what vehicle, what options, and what wiring harness we were using. It loaded firmware. We then took that module, plugged it into the vehicle, ran through the in-vehicle programming procedures. Once the LEDs did what they were supposed to do, we came back and we finished the programming procedure on the PC. What I have a sneaky suspicion they're doing is they've cloned this key. They cloned the fob that we had in the vehicle when we were turning the ignition on and off. That's why it needed to be in the vehicle when you were turning the ignition on and off, because it's basically captured that traffic, and I bet you it has cloned this. That's how it's able to kind of simulate the fact that you're in the vehicle and you're not. Now, don't quote me on it, but I believe that's what they're doing, is that module is making it appear as though this fob is in the vehicle when it needs to start the vehicle, even though the fob isn't. That's why that takeover procedure is important, from what I can gather, is that if you don't do the takeover procedure, in other words, tell the module to not run the car on your behalf anymore, the engine will turn off after a period of time unless you do that. So again, that's what I believe that they're doing. But anyway, it does work. It seems to work quite well. It is an aftermarket unit, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. If you're not comfortable with putting aftermarket units in your vehicle or handling the wiring, then you may want to, obviously have someone do the wiring for you, or see if there is an actual OEM equivalent to putting remote start in your vehicle. But so far, so good. I know it's been a little bit of a long video, and there were parts of this I couldn't bring you along step by step because I only had for some of these program procedures, you kind of have to keep a close eye with the status of the LED of what that box is doing. And it's kind of hard to watch that and make sure that everything's in focus on the camera. But that's kind of why I went over those steps multiple times to make sure everybody kind of understood what was happening. Now, the install guides you saw on here were vehicle, make, model, and specific to a 2021 Jeep Compass, as well as the extension harness that you saw us use on the security gateway wires, just so we could tap into the CAN circuit, or the CAN bus in this case. That's also unique to a security gateway. And again, I'll put links in the description to this remote start kit, to the extension wiring harness for the secure gateway that we used, and everything that I can that you saw in this video. So take it with a grain of salt that this PDF, when you receive it, is going to cover all the currently supported makes, models, and years for this particular model of remote start module. So just like you saw in the beginning of the video, you have to use that table at the beginning, and this will tell you your installation type based on make, model, and year. And then once you have your installation type, when you saw us flip through it, we went to type 12. And you can see that type 12 covers Compass PTS, which was push to start, AT automatic transmission for the 2020 to 2022 years. And then what came inside of that, as you saw also when we were programming, you have a CH10 wiring harness and a CH12 wiring harness. Now, how I knew which wiring harness to use, that was Crutchfield. When I ordered this and gave Crutchfield the year, make, model, and trim details of this Jeep, they're the ones that came back and said that we needed to use the CH12 harness. So I'll put links to Crutchfield in the description. And remember, when we did the initial firmware programming of the module, the first time we hooked up the PC, remember we had to tell it that we were using the CH12, not the CH10. And we did go through and customize this wiring harness a little bit by removing the unneeded connectors and making this this splice-in happen on an extension harness rather than a factory harness, again, just for ease of use in the future and ease of use to be able to remove it. But with that being said, it's been a bit of a long video. Thanks everybody for watching. I do appreciate it. The channel is growing by leaps and bounds. I want to say we're up to almost 1,190 subscribers at this point, getting darn close. I appreciate everybody that's joined the channel and watched during 2020. We're going to continue this theme going forward in 2023, and I thought bringing you along to see this aftermarket remote install on a Jeep, you know, would give you something a little bit different. Give the channel something different to display and add a little bit of variety. So look forward to more projects like this. We still have the Red Ram coming up, and we got a lot of stuff coming down the pipe. I do appreciate it. If you held on this long for my rambling and you haven't already subscribed, please consider to do so. And I thank you. Thank you much. Bring you back for the next one. Bye. And welcome back. So I just want to cover this real quick, that because these kits cover a broad range of vehicles and broad range of types of applications and different types of install based on the type of vehicle that it's going into and the options and such. Again, I just want to show you that some of these wire bundles that either came with the controller or inside the main wiring box there were just items that were left over because, again, options that weren't used or needed. And these were some of the connectors that I went through the main wiring harness and removed because they weren't needed on this install, and I just didn't feel like having extra connectors tucked up underneath the dash that weren't going to anything. So just wanted to show that out. Just wanted to show that to you, that in this case, you know, if you get down and everything's working and you've got some extra pieces left over, it may not be a cause for concern. But I just want to point that out there. Thank you much. Bring you back for the next one. Bye.